And I think a lot of people actually go out of their way to make people feel rotten because they feel rotten.
Hey everybody, welcome to today's episode of the Jeff Heilman Project. Over the next couple of weeks, we're going to dive into a new series called What's the Buzz? And it's basically based on buzzwords and relevancy at this moment in time. We're in 2023. We're getting ready for an election year. We've got all kinds of things going around, and people are starting to talk about things again and going and traveling more and doing those things. And so, Jeff, today's word, I know that we've talked about, we actually recorded an entire episode yesterday about relevancy. We're going to keep that one and we're going to shelf that topic of conversation because I overheard today you talking about this particular buzzword, and I thought that your expansion on this buzzword would be super helpful and able to really touch those of the people that are listening and help them in their current position and in their current professions. The word is, today's episode is brought to you by the word inclusivity. I overheard you talking about inclusivity today. I thought that that would be very important. I know that it adds a tremendous amount of value for the customer, and it also adds value to the community. It goes beyond just business lingo. It goes into home and into your own network. So can you perhaps define, when we talk about inclusivity, beyond just, because it can almost come off as being a negative term, almost like a derogatory term, but I know that it's not, because we want to be included. Can you talk a little bit more about inclusivity in the business place or in the community?
So right now in business, and specifically in HR, in recruiting, software packages that people buy, whether it's Workday or Oracle, there is a movement in large corporations to embrace what they call DEI, which is diversity, equity, and inclusion. And basically, it's an acronym for being nice, right? And trying to put metrics around broadening the expansion. And I think, if you look at a simple statistic like African Americans represented in the United States, I think it's 14.5% of the U.S. citizenry is African American. And yet in corporate America, it's like 1%, 2%. So in other words, the number of people in America that are African American or identify as African American are way misrepresented. They're underrepresented by the numbers of large corporations. And so there's a lot of issues that come out of that, right? What's going on with favoritism? What's going on with potentially people of color not being marginalized or not being hired or being overlooked for roles? And rather than look at who is to blame, because cases could be made to say, oh, it's Caucasian people that are slighting people of color. That's a possibility. And I'm not saying that is or isn't, but I'm saying it's a possibility. A case could also be made that people of Hispanic, Latinx, or people of color may not necessarily be interviewing for those jobs because culturally they may not feel like they're qualified. And again, I'm speculating, but I'm saying there's a case that could be made for either one. So rather than look and say that we're going to blame white people or blame black people, or take an angle to go negative and say here's what's causing it. Diversity, equity, and inclusion is more around being inclusive and incorporating an appeal to the nobler motive of saying we want people to be comfortable regardless of gender identity, sexual preference, people of color, different backgrounds, different religions. We want to be able to come to work and do our job and not be picked on, right? We want to feel included. And I think that I think it can certainly go too far. I heard I'll leave the name of the company nameless on this one, but I heard about an hour ago I was talking a conversation with a friend of mine, and his wife just got a job at a major company, and if I said the name, you would recognize them. And she's been there like 2 months, and somebody in the office had given somebody else a compliment on their haircut. Oh, you had a really, your hair looks really good today after we saw you got a haircut. And they literally said, well, you need to go to the employee handbook on, comments on personal appearance and stuff like that. Like I can get my hair cut any kind of way I want. To me, that seems like somebody who's overreacting and maybe has a short fuse when somebody gives them a sincere compliment about their haircut and they take it into the diversity, equity, and inclusion HR violation context, which is, but this kind of stuff, these are the types of conversations that are at least being had because of this movement around diversity, equity, and inclusion. So a long answer for that, but it's happening. We're seeing it, and we all know what it's like to be picked last on the kickball team, right? We all know what it's like to not be included in.
So how do you then go about
in something like
if
that?
When you're building a team and you want to build a successful team, you're gonna have to say no to some people. Like you're building a team, we understand it in, let's say, the terms of like a football team, and we're going to include all types of people because we're just looking for the best players. And how does HR, or how do you handle saying, some people coming and trying out and they're just not going to make the team? How can that not be construed as, well, you're just not being inclusive, but it's like, no, you're just not going to make the team. Like
Well, and this is where a case can be made for mental toughness. That I've been cut from teams before.
Yeah.
And not included. And there's been times when I've worked really hard and produced. There's even been times where I've been, achieving at the top levels of an organization. And because somebody gets offended or doesn't like the way that I go about doing something, or because they don't receive what I'm trying to do in the spirit in which I'm trying to do it, which is a spirit of excellence, world-class standard, and try to lead by example and do the very best job that I can and perform and cover my cost of salary and compensation on the balance sheet by making sure there's black ink in the ledger next to the name Jeff Heilman. But I think what we have to do at that point is we have to supersede the level of thinking down at the ground level in the hand-to-hand combat of these types of conflicts and questions around political correctness, and we need to take it to the spiritual plane. And the bottom line is that not everybody is going to be included in every single thing. And if people are not okay with that, that's okay. It's okay for people to not be okay with not being included. But as leaders, we need to say, look, we're going to try to be as inclusive as we possibly can. But at the same time, businesses do not exist to create jobs for people to feel included. Businesses create a profit to return to their stakeholders. And the function of a job is to produce a profit for that stakeholder and to get along well. Do I think that the bias or the movement toward diversity, equity, and inclusion stands to gain overall productivity and smooth, well-oiled machines where people are getting along and there's sensitivity to the differences of points of view, how people look, how they operate, what they prefer, all kinds of things? Sure. I think it's a very important thing to understand that a smooth, well-oiled machine with everybody getting along and working in harmony, that's going to produce more than people that are.
We used to call that like a cultural fit because there's a culture too that as leaders that when we're building a team, we're trying to make sure that personality, because I'm just trying to think, like, how would I, if you have two identical candidates on paper and one happens to be a man and one happens to be a woman, but they went to the same school, they've got the same honors, they've got the same track record, they've worked for, the high-end companies. At the end of the day, the hiring person's going to probably have to have it boil down to, they're if they have a polarizing personality, there's gonna have to be an understanding that there's going to be a personality, and if they culturally fit. And our hope as a society would be that whether they were male or female wouldn't be taken into consideration. It's the personality. It's can they fit on the team. And so, I think it's an important topic to talk about. I think that it's an interesting thing to see where we're at. Even, you and I grew up when nobody cared about people's feelings. Sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. Seriously, there was you just did what you were told, and yet here we are finding ourselves in an environment in which we are not only considering others' feelings, we're going out of our way to write legislation about other people, including other people's feelings. We're making our ways in our bylaws to talk about other people and their feelings. And so I think that it's definitely become something that's very important. It's a very important subject.
Yeah, you don't want to go out of your way to make people feel bad.
No.
And I think a lot of people actually go out of their way to make people feel rotten because they feel rotten.
Yeah.
And so I think there needs to be some accountability there, and DEI is certainly part of that. At the same time, are there people who are easily offended? Apparently.
Yeah.
Apparently. There's a lot of people that are easily offended, and ultimately, if people are constantly causing problems because they're easily offended, then maybe it's them.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it's not the policy. Maybe it's not the culture. I do think that ultimately DEI is the golden rule. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Treat other people the way you want to be treated, and try to stick to business. Now, human nature plays in that role. It plays a role there. But I do think it's an interesting discussion because we all know what it's like to not be picked to play on a team. We all know what it's like to be the last person to where it's like, oh my gosh, I have to get this person. And we know it's kids. It's human nature, right? And certainly there's just hundreds of instances of stuff like that at work where you have different personality profiles. But it's to the advantage of the business and it's to the advantage of the stakeholders to try to make the funnel of people coming into the organization as broad and as wide as possible. And certainly we have made some progress, but it's, look at board of directors of public companies. You'll have one woman and 17 guys.
Yeah.
Right? When the number of women in this country is literally 50%.
Yeah. Well, we definitely have to go beyond, and this is why we always talk on this podcast about mental toughness and changing and shaping the way that we think, because I think we have to, if I could encourage our children, if I could encourage anybody, it's to do anything that you can to begin to think outside the box. We've got...
Yeah, and think for yourself.
And think for yourself. And I bring this up specifically because after just this last weekend, you had the opportunity to take Madeline, our daughter, who's been on the podcast, to New York City for the weekend and for about 4 days. And it's been her dream. She wanted to be 21 and go to see New York City, and we're going to Paris in November. So she's really getting a lot of her traveling goals met this year. But she made a very interesting observation. We live in the Silicon Valley here. We live in Northern California. We are in a melting pot. There is every type of culture.
The only top 10 city in the U.S. that does not have an ethnic majority in the city
it is
of San
not
Jose, where
just,
we live.
And then we also we don't have boroughs, and this is her observation.
Yeah, we don't have segregation
exactly.
either.
Her
observation
observation when going to New York City was, she said it was very interesting because they had Chinatown, and then they had the Jewish quarter, and then they had
and
so they have all of these
Jews. Yeah.
They had all of these different cultures that stayed to themselves, and she'd never seen that before because being from here, we are all mixed together. I mean, we've got, you'll have a halal place next to a sushi place next to Hispanic
Taco
place
Bell.
next
Yeah.
to it, and it's very we're all very integrated here. We're all very I would say we're a very inclusive environment. I've always said that the Silicon Valley where we're at should be the poster child of what it should look like going out from this area.
Yeah, it's definitely different than the Deep South or the large cities in the East Coast. No
And
question.
I don't know if it's the technology that's brought us together because we've grown in this area so quickly that we needed people, and they like when Apple was being formed, Google, HP, they were like, we just need bodies, we need people to write code, we need people to build hardware, and we need people to assemble routers and switches. And so it was kind of like just an open call out for employment for every single person that could do every little thing, and that attracted every single nation.
Yeah.
So I think thinking outside of the box, like how I've always sat up late at night and I've thought about, like, okay, if I'm in an area where there are these segregated boroughs of these communities of where people who are like culturally stay together culturally, what is it that pulls them out of that and then integrates to go across the town or across the street?
Well, I think it's large companies for one, right? If you look at the East Coast, they didn't have like 50 100,000 person companies on the East Coast in the 1920s and 30s or the 1800s.
Mm-hmm.
People were coming across. They were sitting in a ship they were sitting on a ship for 6 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
They found out everything about the people on the ship, and they kept at the ships. Get the sick people over here, and then they get the healthy people over here, and you don't mix because you don't want the healthy people to get sick. And then you come over here, and you don't know anybody, and you don't speak English.
Yeah.
You speak Yiddish, or you speak Hebrew, or you speak some other dialect, and so you're looking for any way on the East Coast that you can survive.
And it also took away, like, no matter what stature you were back there in your homeland, once you came over here, you basically started at ground zero. You started
Yeah,
at
because you
zero.
can't
You have
take
no
the
money.
land with you. You can't take your furniture. You can't take anything with you on a boat. You got
Yeah.
a knapsack and your wife, and that's it.
Yeah.
So you're coming over here with nothing. You need a job. Who are you going to gravitate toward? You're going to gravitate toward the people that talk like you do.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to gravitate toward the people that have, same day off to go to synagogue on Saturdays instead of Sundays that you do if you're Jewish coming over. Or if you're Irish, you're going to people that can understand you talking when you're drunk or sober, right? It's hard. You're in survival mode. So you're going to
And we're Irish, so we
Yeah,
resemble
I'm
that
Irish, so
remark, by the
I
way.
can say that. I've drunken plenty for my own time.
So how do you break through, though? How do you is it important? Because I find it difficult as a mutt myself. I have every culture in me. I mean, if you look at my my genetic DNA, there are those of us who would appear to not necessarily fit into any particular group. And therefore, one would look at me from the outside and say, well, things must be so easy
You
for
don't look
you.
Mexican, but
Right.
you are.
Exactly. So then how do you belong to any certain group? And I've found that we belong to groups that we begin, the groups that we start.
Well, we grew up in Silicon Valley. Silicon Valley doesn't have boroughs or
Yeah.
you had Caucasian parents and you grew up in upper middle class with your grandfather as an executive at a large technology company. It's not growing up in a borough in New York City.
Right.
So,
Well, I was just wondering, like, how do you, I guess, how do you feel included when there are no groups that you can join?
well, we were talking about that earlier today. Sometimes the desire to be included will drive us to the lowest common denominator for people to associate with.
Mm.
That's super dangerous. I think we need to all look at the fact of why do we need to be included? We're tribal. It's certainly in our DNA. But is that worth hanging out with people that don't think at the level or have the level of ambition that we want? I would rather be alone than hang out with somebody that's not going anywhere, to be honest. I'd rather be in self-imposed solitary confinement, even though that's relatively impossible considering we've got 7 kids and you and I've been married for almost 30 years. But if we look at the golden rule of being nice to other people,
Mm-hmm.
and recognizing also that being offended is a spiritual issue.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lack of mental tough. If somebody's offended and they're compromised emotionally, it's because they're tired. It's because they're hungry. It's because they don't know how to deal with the feelings that are going on in their lives. It could be because somebody's saying something but you can't make somebody else get offended. You can offend somebody, but you can't. You could do something that could be offensive, but they have to take the bait.
Yeah.
The other way that I think you can be inclusive is to not be upset about other people being upset about something that you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
Just because somebody's offended doesn't mean I have to be offended.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's not like this, I forget what those toys are called, but they're the 2 guys that punch each other until their head pops off.
Rock'em sock'em.
Rock'em sock'em, yeah. You don't have to take a combative, and that's why we talk about option 3. You got fight, you got flight, and then what? Are those the only 2 options? You run away or kick somebody's butt? No, I think there needs to be a third option, which is why I'm working on content for a book or a pamphlet about option 3 of what happens if you just stand in the gap, don't take offense, don't become frustrated that somebody else is losing their cookies. And then what I found is that you can't have one person yelling and the other person not yelling and have that be sustainable.
I think it's important to look at the semantics of the word off-ended, and that it actually means to be basically taken off end. Like if you're going in a certain direction and you stumble, you've become off end. You're offended. Something is causing you to become distracted from where
Yeah.
you're going, what you're doing,
Yeah.
and you're off-ended. And so to be offended is to be like, the person who's gotten offended is clearly something has been said or done that has shocked them, stunted them, caused them to stop in their tracks, and now they're looking in a totally and complete different direction. And so as we look at our own lives, are we getting offended often? Like, are we allowing other people to cause us to stumble regularly? And like you said, if we are, then the chances are we're probably exhausted. Whatever we're doing.
There's typically something physical and something chemical, because emotions are chemical reactions going on in the body. And if the emotional reactions going on in the body are negative, then you can pretty much assume that something's off chemically. You're hungry, you're tired, you might be dealing with a lot of stress at work. You may not be pushing the waves of recovery of sleep or exercise or hydration. All of these things offset different chemical balances in people's lives. When they're perfectly healthy, they may not be chemically imbalanced to where they have to take medication. They might just be hungry.
Yeah.
And yet, sometimes when we're frustrated and we can't see that we're compromised, it's really easy to get pissed off and offended.
I was reading an awesome book by Jen Johnson, the book All Things Lovely, and she was telling a story in there about one of her friends. I think one of her friends, and they said that she came home and she noticed that her husband was pretty cranky. And it's funny because he was getting cranky about 3:00 every single day. He's getting pretty cranky and he's just clearly easily offended. And the thought finally occurred to her, you know what? He's been working all day. He doesn't feed him, he doesn't make sure that he gets up and gets lunch and all this stuff. I bet he's hungry. And so this friend of hers had made it a habit to make sure that she had food ready about 3:00 every day, that there was going to be a snack, a bowl of cereal, cookies, something, and that she would give him that immediately before any conversation, before anything would happen. She'd give him food, and then after about 20-30 minutes, then she would start, talking about things that needed to get done around the house, or things that, maybe some plans for the weekend or whatever. And it was like an immediate switch, an immediate atmosphere change in the home, just by recognizing that, we we hit lulls in the day. We hit times of the evening where we're just no good to anybody. We just need to chill out and be quiet, and we're going to be offended probably because we're just allowing ourselves, we're just tapped. And so I think it's very important, especially in relationships, that if you're married, that we pick up on the cues like you and I were talking about this morning. There's some cues. I'm like, I noticed you've been a little bit more on edge, a little bit,
Yeah, just started a new job. I was on the road on a 3-hour delay
yeah.
in New York City, and I was a little jet lagged. I got 3 hours of sleep last night in between, back-to-back 16-hour days at work. So recognizing that we all have the capacity to be compromised if we don't take really good care of our bodies, and sometimes we have the capacity to be compromised even though we're taking the best care of ourselves that we possibly
Well, it's
can.
really hard to be inclusive. It's really hard to include anybody into what you're trying to do when you don't want anybody around you.
Totally agree.
When you don't want anybody around you, you definitely don't want to be including people. And it goes back to leadership. It goes back to what we've been talking about on the podcast. And I think that any large organization, if they have plans for growth, if there's a vision for success and for, being somebody who's going to make waves in whatever industry that they're in, that part of being, the main part of being inclusive and having an inclusive culture is making sure that your employees are well treated, well fed, well rested, not overworked. And when you do that, you will actually create an environment that is very inclusive because patience is being sown. Like you said, doing unto others, patience is being sown, rest is being sown, prosperity is being sown. And when you have a culture like that, it makes me think of in Mansfield's book, God and Guinness, about the Guinness company and about Guinness and his way that he treated his employees and the packages and the Guinness paid all of his workers double the regular rate, I believe it was, or something like that. And he had health care and he had vacation packages and all of these things to make sure that they began to have a very positive and prosperous culture. And in that prosperous, positive culture, it became very inclusive to all of those who, it came to where people were begging to go work for them.
Yeah. I've seen that with leaders that I've worked for on both sides. I've seen leaders that people talk bad about them behind their back on the regular basis.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe they hear the grumblings. Maybe the leaders hear the grumblings. Probably they don't. But the tough thing is that it kills productivity.
Mm-hmm.
People who are not happy with leadership or feel like they're not being, and I'm almost embarrassed to say that I'm thinking of somebody right now personally that I've worked with for almost 2 years, and they're bad. People badmouth this guy, and I don't feel bad for him because he brings it on himself. But it kills productivity. Mm-hmm. It's not necessary, and it doesn't. And then I've also thought about other people, and I'm thinking of another person here right now, who everybody I know that knows this person says that they're one of the greatest people. I'm getting phone call. I got a phone call yesterday about this person from somebody else, and I didn't even know those two were connected. He literally said that he is the best executive that he has ever worked for in his entire 40-year career. Mm. And I get that about this particular person a lot. Mm. A lot. And people that I meet that know this person say that about him. So I was listening to Alex Hermosi was talking about Mr. Beast, and he said something that was fascinating to me. He said the content, even the content that we're creating right now, the content is not the output. It's the input. The output is the audience and the cultural connectivity of the audience telling people about their stuff. Now, we could ask you all day long to tell other people about our podcast here, but the best thing that we can do is produce great content that you enjoy to where you're interested in talking about it and referring your friends to it because it sparks conversations and intrigue and engagement. And that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to be entertaining, but not entertaining like Johnny Carson. And then you go to bed and think about what's the guy with the 3x5 card? He would hold it to his head. We're not trying to be entertainment, just hee-haw, funny for no reason. We're trying to be entertaining for the point of allowing.
Yeah, we definitely want to hear from you. We want to hear about what you think as far as what does inclusivity mean? What does it mean to you? What does it mean to the environment or the culture? How are you finding it at your job or at your
And are you
workplace and
seeing
in your community?
progress in your community? Because it's not a static thing. We're not living in 1962 in Alabama,
Mm-hmm.
right? But certainly there are places in the South that are still very hostile to people of color,
Mm-hmm.
and we need to be recognize that. But we also need to look at the fact that a lot of things have made progress, and I think diversity, equity, and inclusion being brought up and being built into software applications, and having quotas being set for
I
recruiters
think I read through
is a good thing.
the news that there's some new software, some new AI art, that there's actually artificial intelligence that is being written specifically for the purpose of diversity, equity, and
Yeah.
inclusion, so that you can make sure that that your software is not excluding anything.
Well, the software just helps people make the best decisions possible.
Yeah,
And
the algorithms
what
aren't
I
excluding.
what I think also inhibits business is for people to say, well, we're not going to hire somebody until we can hire somebody that fits this demographic so we can make a quota. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
then you have a business that can't get the job done because they don't have labor.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it can go too far the other direction. But far, and no, I don't think that two wrongs make a right, right? We've heard the proverbial, well, it's their turn.
Is there any way, like,
Segregated
let's
against.
say you're a hiring manager, and if we take a cue from like the Masked Singer on television, they've got masks on. Nobody knows if they're male. Nobody knows if they're female. The judges are just there to just hear the voice, the pure voice. Is there any way, as a hiring manager, that talent alone you think could get
I think
a
talent comes
person
in.
a job? Or
I think talent comes in a bunch of different contexts, and I don't mean that by demographic
mm-hmm.
context. I mean, I think the job of a hiring manager is very difficult because ultimately you're trying to get a job done. You're trying to take head count. You have money to spend in the form of head count, and you're trying to spend it in order to achieve a financial gain. So you're making a judgment call based on all kinds of things, and cognitive bias and judgment and all of our personal biases. They're going to come out, and you can train against it. You can talk about it. You can bring it up, and all those things are good. But at the end of the day, people are going to make decisions to
yeah,
the
they're
best of
they're
their ability.
definitely going to make decisions based on something. I mean, we as individuals, I believe, should tap into our uniqueness. I believe that we
I
all have
agree.
been something that's unique. It's something about you. And if you're looking to get a job, and if you've been interviewing a bunch of times and it's just not happening, there's something about you that's unique, and playing into that uniqueness. And let me tell you an example. When I was in my teenage years and I was going through modeling school at the time, and back in the day when you used to actually have like a portfolio book, nothing was digital. You had photos and you would send them to talent agencies, and you would send them in like an 8 and I remember getting a manila envelope, an 8.5 by 11 envelope to put my photos in to mail out to talent agencies. And I can remember the best piece of advice that kind of applies to my life later on now that I've ever received was, they said, okay, now Jessica, the people that were coaching me as to like getting into these agencies, they said, there's going to be hundreds of the same manila envelope on the same desk. There's going to be hundreds upon thousands of manila envelopes. You need to do something to make your manila envelope stand out. You need to do something to set yours apart from the rest. And so I remember there was an agency, I think it was like Rose City Talent or something like that, when we lived up in Oregon. And I took the time to draw on the outside of my manila envelope a rose, and like I thought, well, if I understood that my my envelope, not even me, not even the stuff, not even my pictures, not even, because you just have to assume that they're going to see a stack of envelopes and they're not going to open they're not going to sit there and open every single one to see every single person that's inside. The judgment is going to be made based on the outside of the envelope on whether that envelope is going to be opened or not. And so playing into my unique talents, playing into my uniqueness of being an artist and liking art, I took the opportunity to draw on the outside of my envelope a picture, something that was going to please the people that are looking at all of the same envelopes. That's going to say, out of all of these envelopes, I'm going to open that one because that one stands out. And so I've kind of taken that lesson as a life application.
Never heard you tell that story before. That's great.
I've taken that lesson as a life application. That is what I am producing, is what I am. It doesn't matter if nobody's going to click on that YouTube video if the thumbnail doesn't stand out or if something about it doesn't. We're a big fan of branding and trying to do our best on first impression. And so pressing into whatever that unique thing is that's going to make a difference, that's going to make a mark in what you're trying to apply for, what you're trying to do.
That is the antidote, in my opinion, that is the antidote to diversity, equity, and inclusion working against somebody.
Mm-hmm.
If you are a shining star, and not everybody sees themselves as a shining star. Everybody has the capacity to be. There's unique contribution that every single human being could make to any organization. There's something that they could do that nobody else could do. But we don't see ourselves. The trouble is we don't see ourselves in that light. And so it's always an issue of how we see ourselves. And if you want a great read to follow up in detail, either audiobook or paperback or Kindle, is Linchpin by Seth Godin. And the call to action from the book is make art. Make your art. Make the kind of art that only you can make, the art that you can see and have. And for me, business is my art.
Mm-hmm.
Doing deals,
mm-hmm.
building companies, taking companies public, taking companies to acquisition. That is the only thing that I lie awake at night thinking in terms of business models and go-to-market strategies and product market fits and marketing qualified leads. And I mean, my head spins with that stuff all day, every day. It's my favorite thing. I love the sales aspect of it. I love the marketing aspect of it. I love the legal aspect of it. I love the finance aspect of it. I love engineering and net new product development and product disruption. I love acquisitions. I love the cultural understanding of how groups and tribes work together. I'm obsessed beyond recognition and have been for 30 years. And the more obsessed I am about it, the better I get at it, and the better I get at it, the more interesting finding out how to make things work becomes to me. And I feel fortunate, and I've tried a bunch of different things, but the only thing that I haven't failed at and cared that I was failing, I failed at everything, including business, but the only thing that I haven't cared about failing at, because it was so interesting to me, was business and other people and trying to help other people do better at their jobs.
Well, I remember when you were first starting out, especially in total relation to what we're talking about as far as, getting an envelope that stands out, or Seth Godin talking about Linchpin and art, being art and making art. I remember when you were first starting out, you were trying to break into technology and getting into technology sales. And I remember we would look at each other because you had no resume. You had nothing. There was nothing. I mean, you had a resume. You could make a resume, but there wasn't.
I could make a resume.
There
but
wasn't
there's nothing
anything
on it that's
on
interesting
it.
to a hiring
And we
manager
would
at a
say
technology company.
and they would say, like, they'd say, send us your resume, and then you would go, I can do something better. I'm actually going to be in your neighborhood, and I will hand deliver my resume to you, because we both understood, we both knew that your unique mark of what you were going to be able to do to be the right person for the right place at the right job was to be meeting them in person, because if we could get you in front of them, then they would know who they were hiring was the one. And so when we're in an oversaturated market, when everybody's emailing, I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've heard this generation, this millennial generation talking about emailing their resumes. And it's like, oh yeah, I sent out 1,000 email resumes. And I'm thinking, good for you. You and your other 20,000
Yeah.
millennial
What
buddies
did you do
also
to make
did.
those
Exactly.
emails
What
different
did you do to make the
than
email different?
everybody else's email with their
Have you
resumes?
considered showing up and just sitting outside the building until somebody took
And
an
the thing
interview
is,
with you?
when you show up and stalk somebody and show up at their office, they will always see you.
Yeah, even if it's to
Even
escort
if
you
it's
out.
just to escort you to security and have the Secret Service come and take you away. They'll see you.
They'll see you.
You'll have
Yeah.
your chance.
You'll leave a mark.
I think there's something to be said for doing things exactly the way everybody else doesn't, because sometimes being an also-ran is the greatest path to failure, and then you have a miserable experience losing and not getting what you want, and you have to regroup and figure out, okay, if I'm going to make this thing work, it's got to be a fit. The role that I'm in right now, the role that I've been in, all the jobs, all the big paying jobs, all came to me through my network of people that liked working with me and thought that I was funny.
Yeah.
And the last job that I had to cold call in order to get was the job where I didn't have a resume.
Mm-hmm.
And I was able to break through because of my unique application. But I will tell you also, I had 5 interviews that day.
Mm-hmm.
Only one guy was able to receive what I was able to do. The other
Mm-hmm.
4 thought that I was nuts and wanted nothing to do with me. So I think it's normal for us to feel unimportant or to feel not included when we're rejected for whatever reason. But the truth is that not everybody is going to receive what you've got. And that's why you just got to dust your sandals off and move to the next town.
Maybe you can tell on our way out as we finish up this podcast, or I can say, I remember Dave, and rest his soul, may he rest in peace. Dave Eggers would finish
He was so
every
good.
plan. He would come to the house, or he would be he would do his presentation, and at the end of every single presentation, he would hold up his plate, and he would look around the room. He would go to everybody who was in the room, and he would say, "Here I have a plate of chocolate chip cookies."
Yep.
Isn't that what he would say? He'd say, "I have a platter of chocolate chip cookies." And then he would go and he would try to offer them to people. And he would say, as he was offering out this platter of imaginary chocolate chip cookies, "Do you like chocolate chip cookies? Do you like chocolate chip cookies?" And then he would say, "I understand not everyone is going to like chocolate chip cookies. But I am not going to be offended if you do not want to take and receive one of my chocolate chip cookies."
Exactly right. Yeah, he was the greatest. I remember, and I did a horrible job working for Dave Eggers, horrible job for almost 10 years. And he always made me feel included. Not one time did he feel like he was going to try to bounce me off the team or get rid of me or wasn't interested in what I had to say. He was never negative. He was never mean. And I think that's because he realized how sharp he was and how fortunate he was to have had such a great life. But that, at times he had gotten slighted as well and had done, had lost millions of dollars and just got humbled. So as we close, I think inclusion is really about humility and about pain, about understanding that it's not the wins, the successes. That's not what brings us together. It's the pain. It's the pain of setback. It's the pain of not being included and feeling slighted and failure and bankruptcy and stubbing your toe or having a health issue or having a family member pass away that you care about. Those things keep us together in our tribe because it's the one thing that we all have in common.
And if I can encourage you in any way, consider yourself a chocolate chip cookie. And not everybody, just because they don't receive you, does not mean that they don't like you or don't want to have anything to do with you.
Some people like peanut butter. Some people like snickerdoodles.
Exactly. Personalities. There's just personalities that fit, and there's personalities. Another analogy is you've got roofers, you've got plumbers, and sometimes you need a plumbing fix, and sometimes you need a roofing fix.
You need
right?
a drummer.
Yeah.
You need a piano player. You need a trombone player. You need a trumpet player. You need somebody to do the washboard.
Yeah.
You need a singer.
Yeah.
You need a bass
and just
player.
because somebody's not including you in something, socially or something, it doesn't mean that you just might be playing a different tune.
Yeah.
They might be a country band and you're a jazz band and you're just playing from a different tune. So hopefully we get to encourage you. Hopefully we have encouraged you on this episode today, and that we've encouraged you to be more inclusive with your neighbors, to do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Be nice.
Super simple.
And if you find yourself being easily or becoming easily offended, maybe take the weekend off. Go take a nap. Go get a massage. Go get a mani-pedi.
Drink and hydrate your body and breathe.
Yes,
It's amazing how just breathing and water will do so much to help people feel better. Good night, everybody.
Good night, everybody. Thanks for tuning in.
See you next time.